everyone. Can you hear me? All right. I think we're on mic finally, and I've got everything set up. Again, let's get started. I'm Alolita Sharma. I work at AWS, and I also work a lot in the internationalization and language technology area. I'm a board member at the Unicode Consortium also, and I have been doing a lot of work in open source, as many of you may know, and we're all here because we love open source. So today I'm going to talk a bit about a really cool library, GlobalizeJS, which many of you may have already used or are interested in looking at out of the box because it provides a lot of support for any kind of locales under the sun in your web application. How many of you are familiar with GlobalizeJS? Just show of hands. Some of you are. So this is good. But it's a good introduction. It'll get you started on learning more about really getting locale support and language support out of the box for your web applications. So needless to say, GlobalizeJS is an open source project. And for those of you, who are really interested in looking at the code or looking at the documentation, you can totally go to the GitHub repo and get involved and even track the issues. And just wanted to share some statistics. It's very popular, as you can see from the metrics. There are, 400, almost 4,000, 5,000 folks who follow the repo actively, which is pretty cool. And then there are 69 contributors. It's an old project from open source, even from open source standards, started in the jQuery era in 2010. There are a lot of pull requests, which are still open, which means it can totally do with your help. And there are a lot of issues that people have worked on and contributed code to, improved support for localization. And it's a very active project. It has an MIT license, which is Apache 2 friendly, which means that if you're extending the code for your implementation or your application, you can actually take the baseline and extend it. One of the core primary contributors to the code, again, a good contributor who I've worked with for many years very closely, is the senior. He also works at PayPal. And has been involved in the jQuery and JS Foundation as well as in ECMA contributions in the JavaScript world. So again, he's very accessible. He's based out of Brazil, but you can see, like the world of open source is global, and a lot of folks work together across the world to be able to collaborate together and solve and help each other and solve problems that we are all trying to use in our applications that we build. So he's been involved since the beginning of the project, almost the beginning. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the history. So it's 2010, right? Fast forward, we are in October 2019. So almost 9 years old. It was started by John Resig. How many of you remember John Resig still, right? I mean, he was very popular, wrote jQuery, and he started the globalization plugin, which is where it kind of took its original roots from. And then Microsoft adopted and extended it with a developer from Microsoft, David Reed, who took it and built on top for a .NET locale support. And then later it was decoupled from jQuery because jQuery got less and less popular, and other JavaScript frameworks and applications became more popular. And it was renamed. The project was renamed to GlobalizeJS, right? So that's a little bit about the history. And in 2016, what we did is that we took the project to make it more compliant with the language data that you can get for locales from CLDR, from Unicode's Common Data Locale Data project, to make sure that it was consistent and could provide you hundreds of locales and the data associated with that in this library. So I just wanted to kind of give you a snapshot of the timeline of the project, which is super interesting for open source projects, right? Because as many of you know, open source projects evolve from a need that some of us had. We wanted to kind of support some of the properties or some of the data that we wanted to get and make it available, and some of the functionality around it. And internationalization is an area where, locale data, language data is something that is used by everybody, right? So if you're, say, even building a web application today, which supports English and Spanish for different markets, you need to have locale data. That is, you don't have to hard code it in your application, but you can actually pull it out of the box by using a library like Globalize. So as you can see from this, and I won't dwell on it too much, you can see that in April 2015, the project started doing regular releases, which is, from when it evolved from being just, hey, this is my fun project, I was just working on it, to becoming more, having more and more users, more and more applications that were using and binding with it, to have regular releases. And as you can see in 2015, the first data payload of CLDR data was pulled into the project, and really, enabled developers to kind of keep the content loading separated out from other functionality. As you move forward, fast forward 2016, once the basic functionality was in, then we were looking at performance. How do you make it more performant? How do you deliver data in smaller chunks so that you don't have to load all the locale data for all the locales that you could possibly have, but be very specific to what you're loading and optimize the library for being able to handle that. And that also means that, for example, we added Webpack support, right? Which is used by many of us still for building out and pulling data and distributing it. Similarly, then we kind of moved on, refactored, continued to refactor the internal code, and added the number parser. Again, as you know, many of you use date-time formats out of the box. You don't want to hard code it in your applications. So you want to be able to pull that, for any locale across the globe, right? Just call a library, use an API, and be able to get the formats that you need for any locale around the block. Similarly, number enhancements, number fixes, units, lot of enhancements as we go along. And there are a lot more issues, as I highlighted earlier. So it's something that is a very live project, and people, constantly are using the library in many different ways. And you can totally get involved if you're looking at solving a particular problem, of serving data or using data in different geographies. So just again, as a project, it's really nice because it's not a huge project, and at the same time, it's not a very small project either, given its usage. It has a roadmap where, what we have been doing is working closely with the ECMA 402 TC39 work group, and driving some of the changes that we need to support, like, for example, relative date time, which has now been adopted by the ECMA 402 standard, and then pull it back into other implementations also. So you can see the evolution of features that users need, also going in from the actual implementation in GlobalizeJS, then going into the standard, and then getting adopted by major platforms through the specification itself. So these are several of the projects that are on our roadmap for building in that support into the library. So just deep diving into features that GlobalizeJS provides. They're basic things, right? Formatting and parsing. How many of you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the formats are for different locales in different regions, right? You build it into your code. If you find it on, you go and search for it, and you find the data, and you just build it in, or maybe hard code it. But what happens is, when you are going past your initial target languages and locales, what do you do at that point in time? You want to build this support in out of the box, and you want to use a library that is actually serving you support, APIs for formatting, for parsing, reading in currency, dates, relative time, numbers, units, you know, and different kinds of language-specific data that you need for a really good user experience for your user at the end of the day for your web application. So needless to say, GlobalizeJS, you know, implements these features like number, date formatting, relative date time, currency. Currency is massive because at PayPal, when we were working on this implementation, we needed to have currency transactions, you know, being supported out of the box across hundreds of countries, right? And at that scale, for a payment application, how do you make sure that that formatting, that parsing, that, you know, handling of currency transactions accurately happens across locales transparently? And at that scale, you really need to automate and be able to have a library such as GlobalizeJS available that you can use out of the box. The cool thing also about GlobalizeJS is that it is, again, standards compliant, right? So if you, how many of you have looked at UTS 35, which is the technical specification for locales? Are you familiar with it? Well, if you're not, please go and look at it, because it actually gives you an enormous amount of detail in the way that locale data is handled, right? And in a world that we live in, whether that's, you know, machine learning that we are doing, or we are doing data analytics or data science, you really want to be able to handle massive scales of data, you know, whether that's currency data, payments, you know, transactions of different types, or analytics with timestamps even coming in on log data. How do you translate that across back and forth? And this is where, you know, the reality hits, right? Because you have to be able to do this at scale. So CLDR data helps you do that. And also, there's another data set which is super important. We all take it for granted, which is the IANA data set for time zones. And you know, again, it's something that the international organization IANA provides, but it's very unusable for most applications, you know, if you are having to deal with it real time. So what GlobalizeJS does is actually provides you, and I'll come back to this, it provides you the this IANA data as in JSON format that you can pull into any of your applications and be able to use that, right? And it's just interoperability across time zones, which you can actually use through JSON in a JSON format for your application. It's open source, so you can use it, right? And that's a great advantage. You don't have to go and write another parser to go and bring that application and, you know, import it and do all the maneuvering yourself. So going back to, again, Unicode CLDR, for those of you who are not familiar with this is a very integral part of providing global support for any web application out of the box. It's been built into, you know, platforms. It's been built into programming languages in terms of, how many of you have used ICU as a library? Some of you have. Those of you who have been doing C, C++ or JavaScript, Java for a long time, you have to have interacted with ICU because it's baked into the language, and it's the internationalization components units library, right? And it's something that's baked into the platform itself, but it supports languages and locales out of the box. And Unicode CLDR is the data that is associated with each one of these locales that you can actually use. So the CLDR is used for building blocks for you know, all the software that we use, whether that's with Java or JavaScript or C, C++, and other major languages. Even there is porting which is ongoing for Rust, for those of you who use Rust. So there's a lot of language support, you know, that is needed for actually being able to provide language support out of the box. It's the largest data set, and it's a standard data set that is maintained and used by all the key large, you know, enterprises across the entire IT industry. So it's not something that's you know, not being maintained. It is actually currently consumed by almost everybody. And then there are thousands of organizations who just pull this data. So it's very important to kind of understand this because you can use it in a portable way out of the box for your web application, right? What it does provide you is, again, as I mentioned, formatting. So formats, date formats, number formats, all the complexity of locale specific formats. Like, for example, in the US, we use, month, day, year. In European locales, day, month, year is used, right? So these are all patterns that change across different locales and languages and countries. And this comes out of the box for you. You don't have to think about it. Just go to the, use this data set and it comes out of the box. Similarly, translations of names. Like if you're looking at, say, doing, supporting Hebrew or Arabic or other right-to-left languages out of the box, or you're supporting CJK languages like Chinese, Japanese, Korean-based languages, you want to be able to have an interoperability in the name or the data pattern or the date pattern or the actual localization string that you're using for each locale. And that data is all here. So you don't have to go and invent it. You don't have to go and research it. You can just use it. And similarly, country information like currency usage, calendar preferences. People use different calendars all across the planet. It's not the same calendar that's used, right, for an official business week. Rules for spelling out how you segment words and text. So these are all built into CLDR, and that's pretty cool. I just wanted to point out, these are the modules in GlobalizeJS, which pulls in the CLDR JSON files that you can use out of the box as soon as you use GlobalizeJS. And that basically provides you currency data, date, number, plurals. You'd be amazed at how languages handle plurals differently, right? Similarly, relative time, unit. So again, there's a huge variance in this data, and I'd like urge you to go and take a look at these files, but they come out of the box with GlobalizeJS. So what I want to do now is to kind of give you a quick example of how do you use GlobalizeJS, right? And how many of you still use Webpack? Many of you do, right? So we all still do it, even though there are other methods of actually being able to use Globalize declaratively. So what does Webpack do? It helps us, kind of generate formatters and parsers dynamically, and really pulling in CLDR data efficiently. It just, you just need a Git environment to pull down your source code, NodeJS, and NPM. And these are the instructions that you can just, kind of take a photo of or just use later. I think this slide deck will be available later. But you can just pull down on Git, globalize.git, and then just be able to run. So I'm running this specific example of app npm webpack. And what this does is demonstrates to you how you can actually get locale data formatted out of the box using GlobalizeJS. Right, so you can take a look at the code for this example also. It's in the samples examples directory on Globalize. And all you need to do really is npm install and npm start, right? So let's walk through this. So what I'm doing is that I want to use Globalize to internationalize my UI here, right? And or messages. Like, how many of you send notifications from your applications where you are actually doing error messages or notifications that need to be formatted in the right, with the right formats and and displayed correctly for messages that you're providing to your end user, right? And you'd like to have that out of the box. Why do you need to go and invent it for every locale, right? So this is something that actually helps you use as an example where you can see that number, for example, in this case, we have chosen the format and you just walk through that. Like you have currency, you have date, you have an INA time zone. We're using Sao Paulo here because that was an example that we tested in Brazil. And you can see that, the date format, we're using a long text, and relative time. That is, how many seconds ago was this transaction actually made? And you see it all the time in your applications, right? Where you'll say, hey, you bought this 1 minute ago, or you bought something 4 hours ago, right? So that's relative time. And being able to actually use pluralization also, which means that if multiple folks were using, a particular interface, or there were multiple tasks that are pending, you have 3 remaining tasks, right? So I'll just go through this. This is the en locale JSON file. So in en JSON, all you're doing is you don't need to change any code. And that's the important thing to note here, that all you're doing is configuration-based locale changes, right? And all you're having to specify is you go into en JSON, just define the data fields that you want to pull in, and just set up the format of the message that you are trying to work through. So in this case, it's number, currency, date, relative time, and unit. And then in your application itself, on the JS, in your JS file, you're basically setting the fields with the text context, and displaying it and rendering it. And the result is at the bottom here, where you can see an example of, using a mixed number where you get, because it's en.json, you didn't have to say anything other than say this is an en.json file with the appropriate, fields that you're pulling in. And in the configuration itself, you can see that the right formats are being displayed for each of the data elements in that message, right? And I just want to compare this with what we are doing for German, which is this other part that you own. All you need to do is define de.json, right, which is the German JSON file. And you're just specifying what you will be displaying with the same format. And all you're saying is, hey, I want the data for number, currency, date, relative time, and unit to be populating for this locale. And it's only configuration. Nothing's changed on your code. So you can see it on the right-hand side. Nothing changes on your code. So it is seamless. And what that does is that it is providing you, for example, look at the currency. It's displaying differently, right? Because it is actually specific to how you would display currency for a German locale, right? And similarly for date, you're seeing that the format for the date automatically is being displayed for the German locale. So this comes out of the box, and you don't have to think about it. And that's huge, because when you're doing this at scale and you're supporting hundreds of countries and locales, you don't want to kind of go and have to dig into what the format is for which country and which language, right? And this all comes out of the box. So if you're, say, doing Spanish, you do es.json. If you're doing Spanish for Mexico versus Spain, you could still have more distinctions there, right? So you could say ES versus ESMX for the JSON file, and you'd actually get a different format based on what formats are typically used in the locale itself. So that's pretty cool. And I mean, I didn't want to get too much into detail because I'd like you to go and check out the code, understand it. It's once you understand, that there's all this detailed data that you have for each locale, it really becomes even more compelling to use this out of the box. And again, get involved. This is my shout out for you to get more involved in open source and get involved in the community. You can come and ask questions. There's a Slack channel that the project has. You can get involved in answering questions that you may have solved for your particular application. And you can even write a blog post, and we'd be happy to publish it on the site, on the project itself. But again, it's that engagement, it's that discussing of solutions to help each other in solving problems which are language specific, locale specific, and really, providing support out of the box. Again, it's super important. Internationalization is an horizontal that touches every application. You may not see it all the time, but it is, something that we kind of assume out of the box today. We've come a long way, and the reason I say that is because Chrome, for example, right? And we use Chrome browser all the time. We use different plugins and release tools and debuggers on it for building our JavaScript applications and debugging through them. And when this internationalization support is baked into the platform itself, it becomes even more easier. So for CLDR and Unicode standards, you can go and follow on GitHub. CLDR.unicode.org has all its code bases on GitHub. You can even raise PRs if you see that data is missing. You can actually just file a PR on GitHub /unicode.org/CLDR. And for those of you who are actively involved, or follow the ECMAScript discussions where the JavaScript internationalization specification is being discussed and formed all the time, and new features are being discussed and being added. It's super interesting. This is an open source project. You can actually follow it on GitHub as TC39/ECMA402, which is the specification for internationalization. And you can follow the mailing list at ES, which is ECMAScript-discuss. And if you have questions, come and ask on Freenode. Again, that's the beauty of open source projects. You can just come and ask, right? File an issue, and folks who are working in that area can come and help. But the important thing, which is at the last part of this, is again support in the browsers, right? Support in the platforms we work in, support in the programming languages, so that we don't have to go and reinvent at the application layer. Because if this is available out of the box, you can just automatically use it. So V8, which is the JavaScript engine that is used for Chrome and Chromium, now supports Intel locale, which is really where many of these features that were, for example, added to GlobalizeJS at a point when Intel.js did not have that implementation, has traveled from GlobalizeJS, gone into the standard, and then shown up on the browsers. And that's pretty cool, because that's how interoperability across libraries works, through the standards, through the specs that we are actually working on. And I'd like you to go and take a look at it. There are a lot of libraries in the JavaScript universe today that are used by different applications. And even if you were to look at this snapshot, there's Polyglot, which was actually invented by Airbnb at a point in time when there was not adequate support for internationalization in the browser. There's Globalize, which happened and it has been becoming more and more popular across 9 years now. There's Moment.js for those of you who were looking at time zone data and actually didn't have it even in Globalize, because it was added in Globalize later. Moment.js was used forever for all kinds of time and time zone manipulation. There's React. Yes, it is. Totally. And so you can take all the functionality which was there, and you don't have to use multiple libraries then. So it does incorporate all that. You have a lot of work happening in Fluent. There's jQuery I18N, which was actually done by my team at Wikipedia. So at that point, we were big users of jQuery. So we actually had to write a whole library to be able to handle the complexities of language on Wikipedia. And we have migrated from that over time. There's Twitter CLDR.js. So as you can see, the universe is populated with different implementations over time, because people just didn't have all the features that they needed to have to support their applications. And so all of these different libraries have been used in different ways by the applications and the services that use them. And then you have Intel, right, which is Intel.js, which is kind of the representation of the ECMAScript specification that I just referred to here, right? And Intel.js is now already available in V8, which is a core engine, that's used by Chrome and Chromium. And we are hoping that, it'll actually show up in Firefox and other browsers and have full browser support. So again, I just wanted to talk on that. And if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Alolita. And please, stay involved. It is very important for all of us to build good global user experiences for our applications. The more globally usable our applications are, the more popular they are. And that matters, right? Whether it's an e-commerce application or whether that's an log application or something that we are visualizing and presenting. But being able to present it in the locale and language that people are used to is the best user experience you can really get out of the box. So thank you for listening. And again, I think we're at time, but I'm around and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.